welcome back. And today we'll discuss sales and operations planning as part of our discussion of operations management topics. This is chapter 14. And in this lecture, the outline is looking at sales and operations planning process, then which is also known as aggregate planning. And then we'll look at the aggregate planning objectives, and then address the various strategies for adjusting capacity versus managing demand, then quantitative techniques for aggregate planning, then hierarchical nature of aggregate planning, and then aggregate planning for services as well. And in case of sales and operations planning, we develop an economic strategy to meet forecasted demand over an intermediate time horizon. So what aggregate planning or sales and operations planning is on the intermediate time horizon, we are trying to come up with a way to meet forecasting demand and establish a company-wide plan for allocating resources for maximum utilization, determining capacity requirements for product group and families to meet demand, and determine the quantity and timing of production for the near future. And so that's the concept of intermediate plan that we're looking at. Also known, as I mentioned earlier, it's also known as aggregate planning. Aggregate refers to sales and operations planning for the product line or the families, not just for one particular product in a product line. Combines appropriate resources into general terms and part of the larger production planning system. Requirements for aggregate planning are logical overall unit of measuring sales and output, forecast of demand for intermediate planning period for these aggregate units, method for determining these costs, and a model for combining forecasts and costs so that scheduling decisions can be made for the planning period. Now, in terms of aggregate planning objectives, it provides for adequate production capacity to meet expected demand and reduce production costs by minimizing over and underloading of facilities. So objective is to minimize cost over the planning period by adjusting variety of things. So you have production, adjust the production rates, labor level, inventory level, overtime work, subcontracting, other controllable variables that the company may have at their disposal. The objective are to maximize profits or maximize customer service, minimize inventory investment, minimize changes in production rates, minimize changes in workforce level, maximize utilization in plant and equipment. So those all could be variety of objectives that aggregate planning or sales and operations planning topic can address. The planning process in this case, if you look at it, is you have the top executives in a company which typically deal with the long-range plans, which address anything over a year, as I mentioned earlier, focusing on R&D for new products, new product plans, new process plans, capital investment, facility location, expansion, etc. And in this case, operations managers are looking at the intermediate plan, which is the sales and operations planning. That is the topic of discussion today. Production planning and budgeting is also handled in here. Setting employment, inventory, subcontracting level, all those are coming into the intermediate range plan, analyzing cooperating plans from other areas, from marketing, from other areas. And then for a short range plan up to 3 months, this is where operation managers, supervisors, foremen on the shop floor basically will look at job assignment, ordering, scheduling, dispatching, overtime. So scheduling is something we'll be covering in later chapters. And then part-time help. Those are the type of specific planning tasks and horizons for a particular horizon that we look at for various type of executives and managers. In terms of sales and planning process, we are looking at the inputs that sales and operation planning receives is from demand forecast and company policies. So you know how much the demand is for the particular product. What are the policies of the company in terms of if this product is strategic for the company or is it just low at the end of its product life cycle, so it may not be as strategic anymore. And what are the company's mission statement as well as strategic objective which dictate if this is the area we want to stay in or not. Financial constraints, what type of budgets are available, and capacity constraints in terms of worker capacity, budgets, or plant capacity that is available, machine capacity. So based on this, sales and operation planning is done, which gives you feedback to marketing as well as operations. To marketing side sales plan, it will give you sales plan by product family as to what is available, demand management including product introduction, promotion, and special offers, and customer service levels are delivered. Whereas operations side, you're looking at production per month by product family including regular, overtime, subcontracting. That's the focus that we have in this chapter. Also look at workforce and inventory levels, and backlog, back orders, and lost sales. So these sales and operations plan actually get monthly updated so that we are looking at the most relevant data. We done? Oh, okay. And in this case, the activities that are involved in here, you can see the product decisions are coming from marketplace and demand, which provide you a demand forecast, which is going into sales and operations plan. And then from product decisions, you are looking at process planning and capacity decisions, new research and technology that is being used, workforce, raw material available, inventory on hand. Those all become the various inputs, external capacity of subcontractors. This is the area that is our focus of this chapter. And from this, we come up with the master production schedule, MRP, which will be covered in the later chapters, detailed work schedule, which will be also addressed in a different chapter. So that's the nature of those things. Now, in terms of monthly sales and operation planning process, typically, basically starts off with the end of month reports, which we actually obtain from running the forecast model. From that, the next step is the demand planning as to how do we plan for the demand that is we anticipate. First draft of the sales plan, and that demand planning is matched with the supply planning, which is coming from the operations side, looking at the capacity and production and constraints. That's the operations plan. And then based on these two, merger of these two comes of the pre-sales and operation planning meeting, where alternatives, what if consensus are decided. And after that, the actual executive sales and operation planning meeting happens, which basically gives us the company game plan about how to go about delivering, meeting demand with the capacity in the intermediate term. So over here, if you look at the managerial inputs, we are looking at from operations side in sales and operation plan. From operations department, you need current machine capacities, plan for future capacities, workforce capacities, current staffing level. From distribution and marketing side, we're looking at what the needs of the customers are, what the demand forecasts are, competition behavior in terms of if there are new products in the wing from our competition, which may threaten the market share of our existing products. Accounting and finance, look at cost data and financial condition of the firm. Do we have the deep pockets to go out and hire more people or invest in new capital equipment? Human resources, labor market condition, and training capacity of the company. Then engineering will provide information about new products and product design changes, machine standards. And then finally, the supplier side, the material department tells us about the supplier capability, storage capacity, material availability in that case. Now, in terms of looking at this information, aggregate planning options are looked at two different ways. Can be capacity options where we change the capacity, or demand options where we change the demand while keeping capacity constant. In capacity option, we keep the demand constant and change the capacity. So in this case, we'll look into changing inventory levels, varying workforce size by hiring and layoffs, varying production capacity through overtime and idle time, subcontracting using part-time workers. So those are all various ways of capacity manipulation to meet the demand. Whereas in terms of demand options, You're looking at influencing the demand so that demand increases or decreases, maybe by increasing the price, you're reducing the demand. And back ordering, give people rain checks during high demand period. Counter seasonal product mixing so that average demand becomes smoother. So let's focus on these two options in more detail. In terms of capacity options, you have the chasing the demand by varying workforce size by hiring and layoff. So over here, one trends to match production rate to demand. Training and separation cost of hiring and layoff workers has to be considered. And also another consideration is that newer workers may have lower productivity than our traditional existing workers. Now, in terms of layering off workers may lower morale and productivity. So those are other considerations one has to keep in mind. But in this case, the second approach available at the disposal of the management is leveling the production, keeping the production at a consistent level. All you do is changing the inventory level. So the workforce stays at one level, and if the demand goes lower, we'll build up inventory. If the demand becomes higher, we'll end up depleting inventory from our warehouse. So in this case, increase inventory in low demand periods to meet high demand, increase costs associated with storage, insurance, handling, obsolescence, and capital investment. Shortages can mean lost sales due to long lead time and poor customer service in case the demand really goes above the amount of inventory that you have in the warehouse. And since you are not hiring any more people, your workforce level remains the same, you may end up arriving at shortages. Other approach is the peak demand, which is maintaining resources for high demand levels, thereby eliminating the possibility of shortages. In this case, other scenarios are varying production rates through overtime or idle time. So as the demand fluctuates, we offer employees overtime or idle time so that they don't end up producing excessive inventory in this case. Allow constant workforce may be difficult to meet large increases in demand because there's only a certain amount of overtime that can be given, given that there are only limited number of hours in a workday. And so a worker who's working 8 hours a day hypothetically can work 16 additional hours of overtime, nothing more than that. That's a total of 24 hours in a day. So you can't even go more than that, even if you want to, regardless of the fact that it by itself will be violating several union contract laws, if you will. Then you have overtime can be costly and may drive down productivity because it is expensive, and that's not the right, typically not the best use of limited resources company have. Absorbing idle time tends to be difficult in many cases. Subcontracting, which is giving the additional demand job to an outside vendor. Temporary measure during periods of peak demand may be costly if the subcontractors are expensive or you're in a bind and you have to take a product from somebody else. Assuring quality and timely delivery may be difficult in this case because if the vendor is not known or untested, there could be a quality differences between the product that is offered to the customer. Exposes your customers to a possible competitor because if that's another downside of using a subcontractor. If they understand the product you're making and can comprehend the profit margins you have, there's a good chance they can also one day compete for your business, for your customer's business. Using part-time workers, in this case using and filling unskilled, low-skilled positions, especially in services, that's another approach that is used to manipulate capacity to meet demand. Now in terms of demand options, in this case, influencing demand, use advertising or promotion to increase demand in low periods, late night or weekend rates offered by phone companies when the demand is lower. attempt to shift demand to slower periods, typically advertising for off-season vacation trips when hotels are less busy, and may not be sufficient to balance demand and capacity in this case. Back ordering due to high demand periods, have customers wait for an order without loss of goodwill or sale. Catalog mail order business for JCPenney, CS does a lot of that, where there are longer lead times to deliver product. Most effective when there are few, if any, substitutes for products or services, but does often result in lost sales in many cases when customers want a product now, and if you can't deliver it, they are not willing to wait. The other approach on managing demand is counter-seasonal or counter-cyclical product service mixing. Develop a product mix of counter-seasonal items. So John Deere produces lawnmowers as well as snow blowers. Same technology, but one is demanded in summer season, other is demanded in winter snow season. So in this case, the demand averages out when you look at the aggregate demand, which smoothens the product capacity needed to deliver that. So in this case, develop new markets for existing products. Euro Disney, Coca-Cola in Asia, McDonald's in Russia, etc. Will offer those examples. May lead to product or service outside the company's expertise in many cases. Euro Disney was an example where in early stages of the company, it did not work as well till they localized the management talent in this case. Partnering with suppliers to reduce information distortion along the supply chain. We talked about the bullwhip effect, so this definitely goes a long way to remedy that. Now let's look at very quickly aggregate planning options and advantages and disadvantages. When you change the inventory level, changes in human resources are gradual or none, no abrupt production changes, but inventory holding costs may increase or shortages may occur. So in this case, applies mainly to production, not to service operations. When we vary workforce, this is avoids the cost of other alternatives, but hiring and layoff costs may be significant. Used when labor, where size of labor pool is large. So think in terms of extras in a movie industry. Anybody can be asked off the street to come in and play a role of an extra. So in that case, the labor pool becomes pretty large, so it's easy to hire and fire without any financial repercussions. Now, in terms of varying production rates through overtime and idle time, match seasonal fluctuations without hiring or training, so you're saving on the expense of hiring and training costs. But overtime premiums are there, tired workers may not meet demand, or they get used to getting overtime all the time. And allow flexibility within an aggregate plan. Subcontracting permits flexibility and smoothing of firm's output. A loss of quality control, reduced profits, loss of future business that happens in this case. Applies mainly in production settings that you see. Now, in terms of using part-time workers is typically less costly, but in this case, you tend to see high turnover, quality suffers, scheduling is difficult when people are there for an extremely limited period of time. Good for unskilled jobs, typically, or temporary labor pools. Influencing the demand, try to use excessive capacity, discount, draws new customers. So those are some advantages, but uncertainty demand, harder to match demand to supply exactly from this point of view. But it does create marketing ideas, overbooking used in some businesses such as airlines and hotel reservations. In terms of back ordering during high demand periods, may avoid overtime, keeps capacity constant, but customer must be willing to wait, but goodwill is lost. So it does allow flexibility within the aggregate plan. Counter-seasonal mixing, that fully utilizes resources and allows stable workforce because of complementing products. May require skill and equipment outside the firm area of expertise if the two products that you're seeking, which are counter-seasonal, seasonal, may not have, one of those products may not be as part of the company's expertise. Risky finding products and services with opposite demand patterns, so it's kind of hard to do that. Now, in terms of quantitative methods for aggregate planning, we look at pure strategies, which will be chase strategy, matching output rate to demand forecast for each period. And that is typically done in terms of as the demand fluctuates, you try to vary your production by hiring and firing people so that you can chase that demand in this case. So in this particular scenario, vary the workforce level or vary production rate, favored by many service organizations where it's easy to hire and easy to fire in many cases. Level strategy is daily production is uniform, use inventory or idle time as buffer. Stable production leads to better quality and productivity in many cases. Now, in that particular case, this is an example of level production that is based on your workforce level, you end up producing that consistent level of production. If the demand increases, that's where you satisfy the demand from existing products in inventory, and over here the inventory will be accumulating in the warehouse. And then besides that, we have some mixed strategies and other quantitative techniques that we'll address later. So let's go ahead and look at these pure strategies with this example. So you have information by 4 different quarters, spring, summer, fall, and winter, and the sales forecast in pounds is 80,000, 50,000 pounds, 120,000 pounds, and 150,000 pounds. And in this case, you are given the hiring, firing cost of the workers, inventory carrying cost, regular production cost, production per employee is given to you 1,000 pounds per quarter, and beginning workforce is also mentioned to you, which is 100 people. Now, in terms of the level production strategy, where we end up taking an average of all the 4 quarters, 4 quarters that are listed over here, and what is the sales forecast? So 80 plus 50 plus 120 plus 150. We take those, average it out, that comes up to 100,000 pounds. Now, 100,000 pounds basically is what we plan on producing. And in this case, if that is the level we want to maintain, that's what we'll be maintaining. We'll make sure this sales forecast will be produced, it will match that with our actual production. So in this case, even though the sales forecast is 80,000, we produce 100,000, thereby we have 20,000 in our inventory in this case. Then in summer, 50,000 was the sale forecast, whereas production was 100,000, so we produced 50,000 more. Earlier, we had produced 20,000 extra. Now we are producing 50,000 extra. So that 20 plus the 50 additional makes it 70,000. Next, in fall, we are actually producing 20,000 pounds less than what the sales forecast is. So 20,000 reduced from 70,000 leaves our inventory down to 50,000. And then final quarter, we are producing 50,000 less than the sales forecast, which is coming from the existing inventory in the warehouse. So that 50,000 becomes 0. The total inventory that we have per quarter is, in terms of pound, is 140,000. So altogether. And then in this case, cost of level production strategy is you have 40,000 units, pounds, each at $2 a pound, plus then there's a 50 cents for 140,000 that is listed over here in terms of units that is kept in inventory, each at 50 cents. So that is provided over here, inventory carrying cost per pound per quarter. So that's 140,000 times 50,000. And that, when you multiply those two numbers, you come up with 870,000. And in this particular case, comparing that with the chase strategy, what we are looking at is you have the sales forecast that is again given to you, the same sales forecast, production plan is given to you. Now, in this case, what we are looking at is the workers needed. And the workers in this case needed are, to produce 80,000 is 80. That means from original workforce level of 100,000, we have to fire 20 workers to bring the level down to 80. Then next quarter, we have to go down to the level of 50,000 units, which will be done by 50 workers. That means we need to fire additional 30 workers. Then look at the following quarter. That's we need to ramp up production all the way to 120, which means we need to go from 50 workers to 120 workers, which is hiring 70 workers back. But that's not nearly enough to take care of the sales forecast that is in the winter, which is 150. In order to match the production to that sales forecast, we need 150 workers. That means we need to hire 30 more people. So number of workers hired is 100. Number of workers total fired is 50. So you can see you have the 400,000 units produced at $2 a unit, plus 100 people hired, which is at $100, plus 50 people fired, which is at 500. That's 835. Compare that with 870. So it seems like in this particular comparison, in these pure strategy comparisons, a chase demand strategy is slightly cheaper. Now, in terms of, one can easily look at mixed strategies, which is some combination of capacity options. A mixed strategy may be the best way to achieve minimum cost, because pure strategies do not work in every scenario. In some cases, level makes sense. In other cases, chasing, that is hiring and firing workers, may make sense in some cases, financially speaking. So there are many possible mixed strategies. Finding the optimal plan is not always possible. So combination of level production and chase demand strategies can be used. So example is no more than X percentage of workforce can be laid off in one quarter. So that could be a rule of thumb that can be used. Or inventory level cannot exceed X amount of dollars. So whenever that happens, that triggers some additional thing that can be done. So some industries may shut down manufacturing during low demand seasons and schedule employee vacations during that time. So there are a lot of ways innovative ways the companies identify to reduce their bottom line costs in this case. Other quantitative techniques that are useful as generating strategies are general linear programming models. LP linear programming gives optimal solution, but demand and cost must be linear that is provided to you. Transportation methods of linear programming are used to provide an optimal plan, and management coefficient models also exist in industry, which is built around manager experience and performance. Other models are linear decision rules, search decision rules, simulations, etc., that are provided in this case. So now let's look at just to see how transportation method compares to the previous aggregate plan that we had created earlier. So in this case, we have an example of in 4 quarters where the expected demand is given to be 900, 1,500, 1,600, 3,000. Regular capacity is also given to you in terms of what is possible. It's 1,000, 1,200, 1,300, 1,300. And then that's the regular capacity of the production plant. And then overtime capacity, which is also given to you as by quarter, is 100, 150, 200, 200. And the subcontract capacity is also listed, which is 500 each per quarter available from outside vendor. Now you have the regular production cost given to you as $20 a unit. Overtime cost is 25, and subcontract is the most expensive, which is 28. So basically what the rule of thumb is going to be in this case is, as much as possible, use the regular production cost because that's the cheapest. And when needed, if you have to go to overtime, because that's the next expensive, and the most expensive is the $28 per unit subcontracting. So in here, in the transportation tableau, what we have done is we have the regular overtime and subcontracting, which is the cost are given as 20, 25, and 28 in this particular case. Now, in this particular scenario, and then inventory holding cost is $3 per unit. So every time you hold the inventory cost for a unit, you have to add that additional cost. You have to hold it for 3 units, and then the cost of regular time goes up, overtime goes up, and subcontracting goes up accordingly. But if you carry something for 2 periods, that's $6 per unit, and then accordingly the regular overtime and subcontracting cost goes up. Same thing for 9 units, that 9 has to be added in 20, 25, and 28 to make up the new numbers. Okay? So in this case, you have expected demand is 900, and in this case, since we have beginning inventory of 300, what we are going to do is use the 600, remaining 600, but so beginning inventory of 300 plus the 600, that takes care of the demand for period 1. So that 900 is provided. We still have, in this case, regular capacity of 1,000 units. Since we have a capacity of 1,000 units, only 600 have been used. So we can choose to use 300 because that is going to cost us $23 a unit. And the 100 units, which will not be, in this case, in this particular scenario, the regular production capacity is 1,200 and the demand is 1,500. So this 300 will be used from this what was produced earlier, and this 100 will be left. What is created in period 1 will be used 2 periods after that. So the effective price becomes $26 per unit, and that is being used over here, plus the 1,300, but we still don't have enough inventory. So 1,300 over here plus 100 over here, that is 1,400. Now we still need 1,600. So 200 remaining, that's the maximum overtime capacity that is being done in here. So that takes care of our total demand for 1,600 in this particular scenario. And then finally, the remainder, now we have no inventory left, and everything else has to be done in the final quarter, in this case, quarter 4. So you have a regular capacity of 1,300. So that is used up. Now we need to produce 3,000 units, as you can see. So you're still 1,700 units short. So in that case, let's go ahead and use up all the overtime that is available. So in that case, one will go about using the overtime from period 1, and that is 100. Then use the overtime for period 2, that is in this case, we are using 150, and then also using the remainder over here, and I think this total you have overtime 150 over here, and that is the maximum overtime available. That max is out over here, and that's the reason. So in this case, because of that, we can't go any higher. So we have a 1,300 plus the 2 overtimes that we used earlier. That gives you 1,450, 1,550 over here, plus the overtime over here, that's 1,750. We're still 1,250 short, and in that case, 500, that's the maximum available subcontracting, that's the next least expensive. So that's 2,250, and then 500 over here, which is the previous subcontracting, that's the, and that is 2,750, and the remaining 250 is being gotten the most expensive item, which is the 250 over here in this particular scenario. So that pretty much tells you, in this case, it'll be the how and when you're going to use overtime, subcontracting for how many units. So the transportation tableau allows a very visual table to deliver the least costly model for matching supply with demand in this case. So in this case, the final production plan that comes out to be, in this case, you have the actual demand. Regular production is going to be so much. Over time, it's going to be so much. That was shown as I arrived earlier, at the subcontracting cost. And ending inventory is given to you, and so accordingly, one can easily calculate the cost for the entire year for this production plan. Hierarchical nature of planning, in this case, notice that from production planning point of view, you have product line and families that are being planned in the SOP, sales and operation plan. And for individual production, then one can easily disaggregate that and come up with master production schedule. And then that can even be further disaggregated into component level in material requirement plan. And then specific manufacturing operations will be covered in shop floor schedule. So this is something we'll be covering in chapter 14, 15, and 17. So chapter 15 and 17 will be covering the future topics of master production schedule, material requirement plan, and shop floor schedule. And then on this side, on capacity planning, that is looking into how much is needed and what is the capacity that we require. So sales and operation planning is matched with resource requirement planning. Do we have the necessary amount of machines? Do we have the necessary amount of workers, etc.? And then based on that, what is the capacity available to you? And then specific capacity requirement plans for various components, and input-output control look as the capacity side, a counterpart for shop floor schedule aspects. Now, in terms of disaggregation, it's a breaking of aggregate plan down to more detailed level and create master production schedule for material requirement planning, as I mentioned in the hierarchical nature of planning. And the collaborative planning is sharing information and synchronizing process across the supply chain. You saw the nature of going back and forth and collaborating. Same thing if you've done across company boundaries. That's where collaborative planning, forecasting, and replenishment. This collaborative planning is the portion that we are addressing right here. Involves selecting products to be jointly managed, create a single forecast for customer demand, and synchronize production areas, supply chains in this case. Now, one of the areas that we look how companies try to work well, operations work well with marketing department is looking at available to promise inventory. So after sales and operations planning is looked at, a plan is developed, one can easily come up with the information feedback that one has to go to the marketing department as to what is the quantity available to promise for future customers. So quantity of item that can be promised to customer, difference between planned production and customer order already received. So in this case, available to promise in period 1 is the on-hand inventory quantity, what we have on hand, plus master production schedule for period 1, what is you're scheduled to produce, so that will add to your total bill, minus the customer orders until the next planned production. So in a way, if you want to think from a student's point of view, if a student lives in a dorm and maybe gets a monthly check from the family at home, they can think of how much money is currently in the bank, plus any money that they expect from either working a part-time job or getting some support from home, if you will, from the family. Add that up, that makes the total available product. Less any expenses that they have for living in the dorm, whether it's books, whether it's the monthly rent, utilities, all those put together, those equivalent, so that will be counterpart of customer orders in this case. So whatever is left over is the amount of money available for any new expenses. Same thing. Anything left over in this case will be the net of any amount that you have available to spend in case of the student, or in this case, available to promise to a new customer, if you will. So that's the period 1. In period N, any future period, you just also have to take into account the on-hand inventory is already calculated in there because that has to be factored in the first period only. But after that, the only thing you are taking into account is what is the master production schedule, how much check you're getting, less how much is the customer orders. So from this, one can also look into capable to promise quantity item that can be produced or made available at a later date. So in this case, from available to promise production, in this case, if you think of aggregate production plan, you have juvenile bikes for youth, you have quarter 1, 2, 3, 4, and the actual number of bikes you have put together for all the kids, 800 in quarter 1, 1,000 in quarter 2, 1,500 in quarter 3, and 4,000, a huge jump in quarter 4, typically bikes for kids would fall under toys, which typically are sold during Christmas quarter, that includes Christmas. So 4,000 at the final quarter is very acceptable number there. So in this case, if you break down this 800 for juvenile bikes, that is broken down by various categories, 26-inch bikes for boys and girls, and 20-inch bikes for boys and girls, and you can see the number. Focusing on just 26-inch bikes for girls only, and looking at available to promise. So if you think of that, 100 is the production items scheduled to produce in quarter 1. So focusing on that, so you have quarter 1, 2, 3, 4. Those are the master production schedule of 100, 100, 100, 100, 300. That is coming from this row for girls 26. So you have on hand 10 items. In April, the forecast for customer orders is 50. In May is 100. In June is 150, and in total put together is, so this is just looking at the month of quarter 2 and April, May, June only. So in here now we are looking at, in this particular case, the total 1,000 broken down by various categories, and 300 is the quarter 2 portion of girls' 26-inch bicycles. So now, April, May, June, we are looking at the forecast is about 300, but the way we are producing it is even 100, 100, 100. So in that case, currently we have 10 items on hand. Now the question is how much is available to promise. So in that particular case, what's going to happen is, what we are looking at is the customer order information is coming in, and once we get that information, we can calculate our available to promise. So the new information that the marketing brings in to operations is how many orders have they booked. So they come in and they tell us that they have booked, even though the forecast was 50, they actually went ahead and booked 70 orders. In May, they actually booked 110 orders. In June, they have only booked 50 orders out of the 150. So the actual customer order books are 230. So based on that, now they need to know what else is remaining that is available to promise, so that they don't overextend the amount that will be made available. So in that case, if you look at the information for the first month, as I said, April, we have to take into account the on-hand inventory, 10, plus what we are going to be producing, 100, put together is 110. So that will be the total available. From that, subtract the 70 that have already been committed. Those are firm commitments. We already have taken a deposit from those customers. So we have a contractual agreement to deliver those 70 bikes to those customers. It could be a layaway, it could be any other form of contract. It's a written word, it's a word of mouth, whatever it is. So because of that, now in that case, you have 100 plus 110, that's 100 plus 10 is 110, minus 70 is 40. So you have a total available to promise is 40. In month of May, what you notice is you actually are going to be producing 100, but you actually have booked the orders 110. So you actually have overextended yourself. Marketing of this company has overextended themselves. So in that case, you are looking at a negative 10, which is not allowed. So you have to make this, match this. So you have to commit additional 10 items that were available earlier in May, April, have to be set aside. Those 10 items have to be set aside for May. So in order to make this 0. So in that case, we are going to be using those items. And so this 40 units of available to promise is crossed down to 30 because you are taking the excess units from April and putting them to the committed orders in May. So in that case, this becomes 0 because now we already have make this, there's no more available to promise left anymore in this case. But in April, we have 30. And if it's not used over here, that can be made available in May. In month of June, that is coming straightforward, which is, in this case, 100 minus 50. So 100 minus 50 out of these 100, so 50 is available in June. So that's a way to calculate available to promise. And one can look into rule-based available to promise where you can use a certain heuristic. If the product request, is the product available at this location, yes or no? If alternative product is available at that location, yes or no? If the product is available at a different location, if any of those is yeses, you can available to promise and allocate inventory. If no, if alternative product is available at alternate location, yes, then still available to promise, allocate it. If no, then capable to promise date, and in that case, is the customer willing to wait? So if you say a customer comes in and says, I would like items in month of June and you don't have any, you can always say, well, how about month of July? And if that is not willing to wait, then you lose the sale. Otherwise, revise the master production schedule and make that additional production. So in terms of production, aggregate planning for services, let's focus on what is the focusing on aggregate planning, but for services component. Most services cannot be inventoried as the nature of services go. Demand for services is difficult to predict, and capacity is also difficult to predict. So in this case, service capacity must be provided at appropriate place or time. Labor is usually the most constraining resource of services, and controlling labor costs is critical. Close scheduling of labor hours to assure quick responses to customer demand. So this is how one actually handles aggregate planning of services. Some form of on-call labor resources are kept, and flexibility of individual work skill is required. Individual work flexibility in the rate of output or hours is needed in this case. So let's look at some service scenarios. So in terms of restaurants, what they end up doing is smoothing the production process in terms of making some items that are partially cooked ahead of time, just so that while the short order cook is available. So before the rush hits, determining the workforce size on a daily basis to make sure seasonality in terms of weekdays is adjusted. Hospitals respond to patient demand in terms of have on-call nurses available, etc. National chains of small service firms, planning done at the national level and as well as the local level. In terms of miscellaneous services, plan human resource requirements, typically, and manage demand. And then airline industry, this industry is extremely complex planning problem, involves number of flight, number of passengers, air and ground crew, resource spread throughout the entire system in this case. So one of the tools that is used in services for planning and services is yield management. And in terms of yield management, is allocating resources to customers at a price that will be maximize their revenue for the company. And in this case, services or product can be sold in advance of consumption. Demand fluctuates, capacity is relatively fixed, demand can be segmented, and variable costs are low and fixed costs are high. So those are all the conditions that make yield management an appropriate choice. So how do you make it work? Multiple pricing structure must be feasible and appear logical to customers. So there should be customers which are willing to pay high prices for the same service and low prices for the high prices versus low prices. So for example, the same flight that a customer ends up taking, but they could be multi-tiered airline ticket pricing structure that could be last minute purchase, could be much more expensive than a purchase that is done several months in advance. So in this case, forecast is, of the use and duration of the use should be known, and changes in demand are factored in. In terms of yield management, this allows, so there are different type of problems that can be addressed. Overbooking can be used, and in this case, type of business could be hotel, airline, restaurant, etc. Probability that of overestimating demand of no-shows, which is number of no-shows, X is the number of overbooked rooms. So that is what we calculate, versus optimal probability of demand or no-shows, which is calculated by CU divided by CU plus CO. In this case, CO is cost of overbooking and CU is the cost of underbooking. Cost is, this is the replacement cost, this is the lost profit. In terms of fare classes, you can use the airline, cruise ship, passenger train, extended hotel stay. Again, same formula can be used in every single sense. In this case, CO is the lost full fare and full fare, CU, cost of underestimating full fare passenger, then you end up losing the full fare, which is full fare minus discounted fare. Premium seats, stadium theaters, same thing, number of premium seats that can be sold, the box office tickets, if you will. So in this case, loss of regular revenue when you have overestimating the demand, and underestimating premium ticket sales, then you end up losing the premium ticket revenue minus the regular ticket revenue. What is the additional premium that you could have charged? In terms of single order quantity, newspaper, magazines, etc., what are purchased at the last minute versus what are by subscription, those are the type of things, and what is the salvage value, if any. So those can be looked into. Again, those are all the examples where yield management can apply. So let's look at yield management of in a particular hotel. If the no-show probability is anywhere from 0, 1, 2, 3, and the probabilities that add up to 100% is 15% probability that there are 0 no-shows, 25% probability that there are one no-show, 30% probability that there are 2 no-shows, and 30% probability that there are 3 no-shows. In that case, what you're doing is calculating the optimal probability of no-shows, which is CU divided by CU plus CO, the formula that we mentioned earlier. So in that case, we are looking at the price that is provided to us. In this case, the price of underbooking is $75, which is the full fare, and because you end up having a hotel room go empty, and then underbook over divided by 75 plus 70. So when this number comes out to be 0.517. So what you're trying to do is trying to find that 0.517 in the last column. How is the last column calculated? Which is, what is the probability that the n will be less than 0? Well, less than 0 is not an option at all. So that's a 0 probability. What's the probability if we are at 1 over here, n is 1, the probability that n is less than 1 is only one of them, which is 0.15. For 2, what you're looking at is what's the probability of n less than 2, which can be either 0 or 1, which is put these two together, that's the 0.40. For 3 no-shows, the probability that you get less than 3 is 30 plus 25 plus 15, that's 70, that's over here. So what you're trying to find is where would 0.517 lie, and that is between 0.2 and 3. So what is the minimum, what is the number that covers at least 0.1, that is no more than 0.517. So in this case, the nearest is 0.40 without going over. and in that case, that corresponds to 2. So hotel should overbook by 2 rooms. So that way they make sure they are not in a situation of losing by overbooking in this case. So you're looking at, so that will be the best result in that scenario. In the yield management example, how to basically understand this is you have the demand curve as, so there is a variable cost of room, and the more rooms that are maybe gotten ready, it costs some money to get the room ready for that night, but if it's not used, that has to be done once again the next night and so on and so forth. But you are charging $150 per room for the night. So in that case, if you look at it, in this particular scenario, what this figure is providing you is the dollar margin. So your price times the 50 rooms. So you have the difference is what money you made. So if you have 150, if you have 50 rooms that are actually you end up selling, for each room you paid $15 to the house cleaning staff to fix the room, but you charge the customers $150 for the night. So that's 150 minus 1,535, which is going here, times the 50 rooms. So you're generating 6,750. So in this case, you have both sides. Over here, some customers would have willingly paid more than $150 a night for a room if they are really desperate. And the other ones are potential customers exist, but who are willing to pay more than the $15. So if it, so you're missing out on these customers as well. So these are passed up contribution, and this is the money left on the table. So you need to, by only having one price policy, you're only getting customers in this block over here, which is getting the 50 rooms which will fit into this demand curve scenario. So everybody pays the $50 a night, but there are some people who could have paid a lot more and some people who could have paid a lot less, but that money contribution is not captured. So let's see how that can be captured in this case. If you were to create 2 scenarios, in this case, 30 rooms could be at a different price. So in this case, you are charging $100 price of one room and $200 price for another room. But $100 rooms you are keeping, in this case, 30 rooms for $100 and 30 rooms for $200. Now, instead of 50 rooms, you have a total of, instead of 50 rooms, you have a total of 60 rooms available. Because what this demand curve is saying is, if you just had a not-for-profit scenario and you offered the rooms at $15, all 100 rooms will be sold. And that's, but no hotel will be going to that scenario. So in this case, by even creating a 2-price policy and $100 price for one room, so anybody who books in advance gets the 30 rooms early on, and others end up paying $200 a room. So in that case, what happens is the first price times the 30 rooms, second price of 30. So you have 100 minus 15, which is $85 is the net profit over here for the first 30 rooms. And then 200 minus 15 is for the remaining 30 rooms. So that gives you 2550 plus 5550. That's a total of 8100 compared to the 6750. So by segmenting the customers, you are able to get more of this triangle covered in this particular case. Much more is covered in the shaded region than before, as you can see. This was much smaller portion. And that pretty much addressed to our last discussion. And in this case, let's just address what are the things that typically, how we can analyze yield management technique possibilities in service industry. So when you look at putting things in various industries in 4 different quadrants, you have duration of use, which is unpredictable versus predictable. If you think of movies, the amount of use that a customer will have is predictable, maybe 2 hours, 3 hours for the time of the movie, stadiums just for that evening, convention centers during the duration of the convention, etc., hotel meeting space. Those are predictable environment. Same thing for hotel, airlines, car, cruise lines. Those are very predictable environment. Now, other one is price tend to be fixed versus tend to be variable. So based on that, you can actually come up with 4 different quadrants. In movie theaters, the price tend to be fixed, stadium arenas fixed, but at the same time, use is also predictable. So those all come into one category. And in terms of the quadrant 2, where the price tends to be variable, demand is predictable. So that's where you kind of look into this. So quadrant 2 typically is the area where you see majority of yield management techniques applying. Whereas in cases of movies in the United States, you still notice some sort of scalping that happens. That is more of an informal version of yield management or arbitrage that is happening for a movie that is much more in demand, and people are willing to wait to see the movie, or people are willing to pay higher prices. In terms of stadiums and arena, you still see some yield management that is being done where companies like StubHub or other companies that sell tickets are willing to charge a premium for based on how many tickets they have already sold. So that concept is creeping in here, even though the prices in general tend to be fixed ahead of time. Quadrant 3 is restaurant, golf courses, and over here, even though the duration of use is unpredictable, but then you have the reservation system coming in, maybe paying the maitre d' or server just to get a seat. That's another informal version of the yield management coming in, etc. And then finally, the quadrant 4, continuing care hospitals, the price tends to be variable as well as the demand tends to be variable. So notice that quadrant 2 is traditionally the one where you have the prime focus of yield management in most cases. That pretty much wraps up our discussion of aggregate planning or sales and operation planning in this context, and we'll see you again for another topic of operations management. Thank you.